Ask anyone on the street to name a ballet, and the first thing they'll say is...
Swan Lake.
Swan Lake? Swan Lake.
Swan Lake, yeah.
The Blue Danube.
Well, 4 out of 5 will say Swan Lake. Swan Lake is the most popular ballet in the world. It's the ballet that captures like no other the full range of human emotions, from hope to despair, from terror to tenderness, from melancholy to ecstasy. No wonder then that upon its debut, Swan Lake was hailed as a monumental flop. It's difficult to imagine Tchaikovsky's rich and memorable score not inspiring great dance. But Swan Lake was a major disappointment at its first performance. It was given a poor choreographic treatment, and the ballet was said to have no future.
What would I have thought in 1877, having seen that first Swan Lake in Moscow? Well, I hoped I would have thought it was a mishmash and would have advised them to do what they in fact had to do, go back to the drawing boards. I hope I would have seen the quality in the music.
Nearly 20 years later, after the success of Tchaikovsky's score for The Sleeping Beauty and The Nutcracker, the ballet master of the St. Petersburg Imperial Theater in Moscow, Marius Petipa, considered a revival.
As for the 1895 production, the successful production, I hope I would have recognized that for the masterpiece it is.
I think what keeps Swan Lake alive today is the same thing that keeps Nutcracker alive today. It's the sense of continuity to the ballet. It's the challenges that it poses the dancers, because technically Swan Lake is probably one of the most difficult ballets to perform for the leading dancers. And there is the constant of Tchaikovsky's genius.
The version that survives today is the combined achievement of Petipa and his assistant, Lev Ivanov, the brilliant choreographer who fully developed the central dramatic idea of a woman trapped in the body of a bird. Where other choreographers would be content to leave this to the costume designer, Ivanov's swan is meaningfully communicated by the ballerina's entire body, the movements of her arms, the articulation of her feet, the positioning of her head and neck. With Swan Lake, Ivanov and Petipa not only extended the capacity of the dancer, they also created a brilliant metaphor. No doubt, Ivanov probably sat along a lakeside such as this one to observe the movements of a swan.
He must have noticed how it glides along with grace and dignity, but was probably also struck by the hidden exertion of the legs and feet, working to achieve the illusion, exactly as it is with a ballerina.
The Petipa Ivanov version of Swan Lake was a fantastic hit, but sadly, the man who gave it its trademark never got the credit he deserved. Ivanov was the subject of a cruel cultural turn, for while Russian dancers thrived on the world scene, Russia itself preferred foreigners. So though Ivanov should have been hailed as a major talent, he was listed in the program as a mere collaborator, with Petipa, who hailed from France, listed as the choreographer. Regardless, Petipa and Ivanov got Swan Lake into shape, their collective choreography converting a flimsy fairy tale into a work of great acclaim. Oh, and in the event you're not familiar with the story, let's take care of that right now.
Swan Lake tells the unlikely story of a young Prince Siegfried who falls in love with the Swan Queen Odette, a woman transformed into a bird by an evil sorcerer. Odette explains that she is destined to remain as a strange composite creature until rescued by a man's undying love. Enthralled by her beauty, the prince pledges his eternal love. But later, at a ball given in his honor, he is tricked by the sorcerer von Rothbart into declaring his love for Odile, an evil twin of Odette. Realizing his betrayal, he rushes back to the lake. There, he battles von Rothbart and destroys his power. The lovers are then reunited. It's a silly story, but audiences and dancers alike are compelled by it.
When I first started doing it, what I thought about was the look of it and just doing the steps simply and listening to the music and letting that carry me along. But as I started doing it more and really delving into the silly story, it seemed to take me over, and I tried to make it as real as possible. To think every step was a sentence, to talk to my partner, to talk to the audience, to really make the audience believe in this silly story, to believe in my love, to believe in my despair.
I want to believe it. I feel it's so, it is a little mysterious almost, but it's so idealistic, the true love.
Swan Lake, it is, first of all, not just fairy tale. It is human drama. And it's really, Swan Lake, I mean, it is a very spiritual experience, most of all.
The Swan Lake that we see today is not an entirely faithful one. Choreography is passed down hand to hand, and as a result, as years go by, variations occur.
For instance, in the original production of Swan Lake, the prince's dancing was limited, but over time, the role has come to include a number of exciting solos. This is reflective of the greater involvement of the male dancer in ballet. But just as significantly,
over the years, the dancer has changed, and as changes the dancer, so changes the dance.
Now, no young girl today who's a dancer would want to look like a stocky dancer of the past when calf muscles were in vogue, and certainly the whole ideal of being thin, if it's an ideal, was non-existent. Also, technique is different, and dancers' bodies have changed because of the muscles they use. And also, you don't want people looking the way they did in the 19th century in any art form. Do actors perform the way they did in the 19th century? No, I think each time speaks in a different manner.
In fact, early swan queens would have performed a handful of pirouettes the entire ballet, and more noticeably, they would have spent very little time on point. A startling contrast to the much more demanding amount of time today's ballerina spends on point. So you can imagine the physical rigors of today's Swan Lake on a ballerina. For though there's something to be said for the point shoe helping the ballerina get up onto point, so as you can see, it offers the ballerina very little support. There's nothing more than satin, canvas, bit of glue, leather. So the matter of staying up on point is strictly a matter of muscular and emotional discipline. Another reason Swan Lake is more technically demanding these days is due in part to a remarkable Italian ballerina by the name of Pierina Legnani. When Legnani danced the central dual role of Odette Odile, she brought to it the ability to perform 32 fouettes in a row. The public was so impressed that from that production on, any ballerina who danced the role had to perform the 32 fouettes. Legnani's name is still cursed by ballerinas the world over.
Oh,
And they fear
I struggled all
fouettes.
my life with those fouettes, but finally I accept as a fact it's evil necessity.
A fouette is a fast whipping turn on one foot, like this. As you can appreciate, it's very difficult to stay in place while doing this.
I remember my first fouette. Can I tell? My first fouette, my first full-length Swan Lake in Leningrad. Usually on fouette, you know, people, if it's not very stable, traveling front towards the public. Forward.
Especially with the stage.
How happened? Why after, it's supposed to be 32 fouette, but after 16th, I think I finish in the back wings and disappear there, totally. You know,
You left fouetting.
I left fouette. That's my first experience with fouette. That see how much I love them.
But ballerinas don't just hate the 32 fouettes because they're technically demanding. They also resent them because they are, in essence, a circus piece. In other words, they're strictly for effect, movements with no psychological motivation behind them. And for a ballet like Swan Lake to be a fulfilling experience, the movements have to reveal character. They have to have reason.
Well, you know, to be a great actress, you don't necessarily have to dance, but to be a great ballet dancer, you have to be a great actress as well.
This discovery of the motivations for your actions is particularly important in regards to Swan Lake. Firstly, because 19th century ballets are rife with divertissement, like the 32 fouettes. So it's very easy for the ballet to become a whole series of tricks. Let this happen, and an audience, though impressed, will not be moved. And if a production of Swan Lake doesn't emotionally move you, then something is horribly wrong. But acting ability is also extremely important because Swan Lake presents the ballerina with a very challenging role, the dual role of the white swan, Odette, and the black swan, Odile.
Вообще, Swan Lake очень сложный спектакль.
Swan Lake is a very complicated ballet. Very few
Мне кажется, что
ballerinas really succeeded in showing the two sides, the two pictures of Odette Odile.
и может показать вот этот вот
And it was done sometimes with two different ballerinas. It's always one act that's nearer to the character of the dancer. And usually one of the acts turns out more natural feeling than the other one.
I've always found Odette much more, I'm much more adaptable, easily slot into the feelings of Odette than Odile. And part of that has to do with, I suppose my technical abilities are more suited for the more lyrical dancing than for the more virtuoso dancing. Whereas Odette is also difficult technically, but in a much different kind of way, much more controlled, much more emotional. So yes, I always felt better suited to Odette.
People always loved me in the Black Swan, and I enjoyed doing the Black Swan. I really felt that the Black Swan had to be as much the White Swan as possible, because I didn't want the prince to seem so stupid. And I know he was just blinded by love and by the glamour of it all, of the Black Swan. And yet, I felt that she should have some shred of the White Swan, something that would make him believe that that was Odette. And so I really tried to soften her edges every once in a while. She was very sharp. I tried to make the Black Swan as seductive, and her movements sharper and hard-edged, and yet soften them every once in a while when he was looking at her with wonder. And that helped, I think, to make her more believable and to make him more believable in what he was seeing in her.
This ability to act is also extremely important for the central male dancer, Prince Siegfried, largely because the character is rather one-dimensional. This can be traced back to the early days of ballet, when men played a very limited role. Basically, they were no more than porteurs, men who carried the ballerina. But today, the prince can be a much more important and interesting character depending on the dancer's ability to add dimension.
What can mysteriously make this young man somewhat troubled in the midst of all this jubilation is the fact that it's his birthday. He's going to be the king. And suddenly, he's alone. The peasants are all happy because, well, you know, they're going to have a king. That means, you know, in the 15th century, in this particular production is set, that means the peasants are going to have a little bit less of a time with neighboring hordes coming in, raping and pillaging. Basically, you've got a king. And the noble people that you've grown up with, suddenly they have an agenda. They want to get close to you. They want to, they're reacting towards you in a very different manner and very formally. And I tried through the course of the action to develop the first act to the point where that slowly dawns on the young man that, well, he's not a kid anymore. And along with the responsibility comes an aloneness. When you're in a position of responsibility, you make your decisions alone. You can go everywhere for advice, but you have to make them alone. That's a frightening realization.
Swan Lake is certainly demanding on the ballerina, but it's equally demanding on Prince Siegfried. For more, let's turn to a dancer who has performed the role well over 100 times. Welcome to the program.
It's nice to be here.
Now, does Prince Siegfried have as much to do as the Swan Queen?
Oh, yes, certainly. The Swan Queen, remember, doesn't come on till the second act, and the Prince is on right from the first act and stays straight through to the fourth act. It's a very difficult role for the Prince. To be a great Prince, you have to be able to dance brilliantly those solos, especially in the first act and the third act, and also to be able to partner magnificently, and that's very demanding.
To perform Swan Lake at the Met with Cynthia Gregory or Makarova, or whichever ballerina I was performing with. And the next day, when I finished the night before performing, because it's, as you mentioned, 4 big acts, you feel so broken that the next morning when I put my first foot down, and I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I thought, I feel like Dr. Coppelius already. I feel like the Phantom of the Opera stepping down from the bed in my first step. I could hardly walk getting off the bed. I thought, what happened to me? A truck went over me or something.
If Swan Lake offers a choice role for both the ballerina and the danseur noble, it also offers them some glorious moments together.
There can be nothing more beautiful than doing the second act pas de deux in Swan Lake. There is just such a strength, again, of conviction and belief in love, beauty, magic, in the choreography and in the music that becomes a marriage.
Swan Lake remains a favorite among dancers, no doubt because it is one of the few classical ballets that is as consistently challenging technically as it is emotionally. In a successful production of Swan Lake, there should be no visible distinction between dancing and acting. The challenges are realized hand in hand, and it is this that makes Swan Lake the most impressive, moving, and most enduring of the classic ballets.